It's about 7 past here, so we'll get started. I want to thank everybody for coming out to the Delaware County Heroin Task Force presentation on the opioid and heroin crisis. And let's start out as we always do here. Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so just to give everybody an idea of what we're doing here, first off, my name's Luke Clark. I'm one of the commissioners here in Radnor Township. Again, thank you for coming out tonight. What we're doing here today is we're talking about the opioid and heroin crisis. And we have our co-chairs from the Heroin Task Force here who can give some insight into available resources in the county. We also have law enforcement from Radnor Township, as well as the head of law enforcement for the county here. We also have a neighbor who will recount his personal experiences with opioids, and Colonel John Church, who can give us some insight from an institutional perspective as to what institutions are doing and at least what his institution is doing with regard to this crisis. So with that being said, I'm going to give an opening here. Jack Whelan's going to give an opening, and then I will go through who everybody is and what their background is. So again, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank the 5 other gentlemen up here on the stage for being here. Everybody here is very busy. We all know that, so thanks for taking time to come out to address this issue. I don't know anybody personally, which hopefully continues, who is suffering from this disease, but from what I understand, about 25% of families do. This is an epidemic. This is a crisis, and if you've grown up in Delaware County and you live in Delaware County like I have, I think I would consider this almost the epicenter of this crisis. This is something that is rampant in this county, and it affects all the communities in this county. Just today, I was listening to Andy Block here, who's here with John Ricciuti on Radnor Studio 21, where they were addressing this and gave a very good precursor to what we're doing here tonight. And living in the Philadelphia area, which is considered a hotbed for importation given where it is, I'm obviously very concerned. I look at this from one perspective as the father of 3 young children, so this is the number one thing that concerns me in raising my children, especially here in Delaware County where it is such an issue. So I look at it from that perspective, but I was speaking with Jack and Dave, and they've really inspired me with what they've done in taking on this Delaware County Heroin Task Force and all the efforts they've made to feasibly address this crisis. We can all talk about it. We can all throw ideas out there, but actually taking the steps to implement ideas is the most important part, in my opinion, and they've done that. They have, and they will talk about it more, but they have installed drug drop-off boxes. We have one here in Radnor in different police stations and things like that. They have the mobile van, where this van can go anywhere to get prescription drugs or anything that people want to get rid of, and they have also taken the steps, or Delaware County Council has, to bring in and address the issue of the drug manufacturers and what role they play in this by filing suit. So they've really been leaders in addressing this epidemic with regard to it on all levels. So I'm glad that they're here, and with that, I will turn it over to our District Attorney, Jack Whalen.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark. I appreciate the fact that you've invited us here tonight, and I'm always proud and honored to be in Haverford, Radnor Township, and our neighboring jurisdiction. We were left from Haverford Township, where we've spent quite a lot of time in addressing this issue. So it's a pleasure to be in Radnor, the neighboring community. We've also addressed the issue in Upper Darby Township, as well as Ridley Township, and other communities across Delaware County. And the reason we've been going to different communities and we're lucky to be here tonight is due to the fact, as Commissioner Clark has indicated, that this is an epidemic that is not only facing Delaware County, but every single county in Pennsylvania, as well as every state across the country. My colleagues in the District Attorney's Office throughout the state of Pennsylvania, we meet periodically And their number one concern, even in rural places in Pennsylvania, is the heroin and opioid epidemic. And that may be hard to believe in areas that have predominantly farm areas, and that the agricultural efforts are basically in farming, is this opioid and heroin epidemic. So it's not just here in Delaware County or in Radnor Township or in Haverford Township or in Upper Darby Township. It's certainly across this great country and this great state. So we've taken the efforts, and we're going to address some of those efforts here tonight. I want to recognize the Radnor Township Police Department, certainly Superintendent Cararulo. We work with the Radnor Township PD on a regular basis. They have a tremendous force here in Radnor. They do an incredible job. We're so proud of them to be able to work with them on a daily basis. So I want to certainly give a shout out. And I also want to say to individuals in the audience and anyone that would be watching this on cable, the Heroin Task Force is really based on a group of individuals that their key efforts are based on education, prevention, awareness, and more recently, treatment and recovery. But I think the residents should know that we also have a narcotics task force, and that's 60 undercover police officers that are working on a daily basis in different neighborhoods trying to reduce the efforts of criminals that would be out there selling to our youth, to young adults, to people that are putting these drugs in our neighborhoods, actually polluting our neighborhoods. So we do work on that also on a daily basis. So we have two efforts going on here, one through the Heroin Task Force, and another one that you won't hear about too often because it's more of an undercover operation, and that is our Narcotics Task Force. But I look forward to discussing the issues with you today, and then at the end, taking any questions you may have in addressing some of the problems that we see across Delaware County. So thank you.
And thank you, District Attorney Jack Whalen. So as I said, and thank you for that opening. So as I said, I'm going to introduce everybody here briefly, just so you get an idea, if you don't know who they are, what their background is, and what experience and expertise they have in this field. We have Delaware County Councilman David J. White over here, who is a county councilman, and he is also the co-chair of the Delaware County Heroin Task Force. He is from Ridley Township, currently serving on Delaware County Council. He's a lifelong resident of Delaware County, and he has been serving his community for over 30 years as an elected leader and a volunteer. He's a steam fitter and an owner of DWD mechanical contractor, which is located in Delaware County. As I said, he is the co-chair of the Heroin Task Force, so he works alongside District Attorney Jack Whalen on initiatives to combat the heroin and opioid epidemic, such as installing medicine drop boxes in all police stations across the county, launching the Second Chance employment, and hiring certified recovery specialists to respond to overdose victims and provide resources for recovery. He also works with recovery homes and grassroots organizations to prevent addiction and offer recovery to those in need. And next is District Attorney Jack Whalen, who you just heard from. He is the co-chair of the Delaware County Task Force along with Councilman White. He was elected the district attorney in 2011 and took office in 2012, and he was reelected in 2015 to serve a second term. He has been dedicated to criminal justice and law enforcement since he was in college, where he majored in criminal justice, and when he was on county council, he made public safety a priority. As the district attorney and the chief law enforcement officer in Delaware County, he's taken the lead on many of these public safety initiatives, and working with the county and police chiefs to equip the police officers of Delaware County with the nasal Narcan. And in September 2012, the task force was established, and that was to address and raise awareness with regard to the opioid and heroin abuse that's impacting our county and our nation. So he's been the driving force behind several of these opioid prevention and awareness initiatives, and they've received federal and state aid. So these are things that have garnered attention at the state and national level as well. We also have Colonel John Church over to my left, who is the president of Valley Forge Military Academy and College. He became the 12th president of Valley Forge Military Academy and College in early 2016. Before assuming that presidency, he was assistant professor at a Immaculata, and he previously taught at UNC Wilmington, the Naval War College, George Mason University, Holy Family University, and Rosemont College. And he also he attended the Naval Academy Prep School before receiving his appointment to the U.S. Naval Academy, where he actually was a member of the nationally ranked lacrosse team. So that's very impressive. And as a junior officer, he was also a member of the all-select rugby team as well. So an educator and a stellar athlete as well. He did earn his MA in National Security and Strategic Studies from the Naval War College. He also received an MA in Communications Journalism and Public Affairs from American University, and he has a BS in Political Science, like me, from the Naval Academy. Unlike me, I'm not from the Naval Academy. So he is currently a doctoral student in mass media and communications at Temple, and when on active duty, Colonel Church served as a combat engineer in Okinawa, Japan, Mogadishu, Somalia, and as a reservist, he led Marines in Macedonia, Kosovo, 2 tours of duty in Iraq, served in Afghanistan, and taught civil affairs to soldiers of the armed forces in Liberia. So he has a very impressive background. His last assignment was commanding officer of the 3D Civil Affairs Group in Great Lakes, Illinois, and he retired in February. And that was it, John? That was it, Colonel? That was it? All right. He retired in February after 35 years of active and reserve service as an enlisted sailor, midshipman, and officer of the Marines. He was the 2015 recipient of the Major General John Hildring Award for Outstanding Military Civil Affairs Service, and he was also selected as the 2016 winner of the Brigadier General Robert Denig Sr. Memorial Distinguished Award. He lives here in Radnor with his wife, Mary Kay, and they're the proud parents of 4 children, and he is the son of Colonel and Mrs. John Church of Clinton Township, Michigan. So, Colonel Church, thank you for being here. And we also have Mr. Steve Graham Jr., who is sitting to my left. He is a Radnor resident and a neighbor of mine. He grew up in Malvern and attended Malvern Prep before attending the hotel school at Cornell University. When he graduated from Cornell, he then spent 5 years running high-end restaurants and nightlife venues in New York City and Philadelphia, and he was responsible for launching and operating some of the top venues in each city. Apparently that is a stressful business from what I understand. He began working with technology companies thereafter, ranging from startups such as PeopleLinks and Relay Network to the global company SAP in Newtown Square. While working in technology, Steve was responsible for business development and sales management. Having grown up with entrepreneur parents, who I know, and they are wonderful people, he was eager to create something of his own, and he launched Graham Media Partners along with his wife, Lisa, who is lovely. In addition to managing their growing business, they have a 15-month-old son, Trip. We were just talking about him out in the hallway, and they live in Wayne, like I said, right near me. So we've become close over the years, and I'm glad to know him, and I really appreciate him being here to discuss his experience with this. Last but certainly not least, we have Sergeant Joe Pinto from Radnor Pd. And Sergeant Pinto, I'll let you go into some of your credentials when we get around, if that's okay. Okay. So with that, I'll pass it off to our District Attorney Jack Whalen to give some more perspective on this issue.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark. I have to get used to hitting the mic. Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Heroin Task Force and some of the efforts of the Heroin Task Force. And Councilman White, who is the co-chair of the Heroin Task Force, will also share some of this so that I'm not monopolizing the time. And he'll cover issues of treatment, recovery. Also, he'll comment on the pharmaceutical suit that the county has brought against some of the major manufacturers of opioid medication across this country. The Heroin Task Force, as Commissioner Clark has indicated, was formulated back in 2012 when we saw back then an uptick in the use of heroin and the use of opioids and that type of abuse. We didn't realize at the time, back in 2012, that it was going to actually increase and become the epidemic that it is today. But nevertheless, in 2012, when we formulated the Heroin Task Force, we started taking immediate efforts to try to address the situation. But our mission statement back then was prevention, education, and awareness. And if we just look at the issue of education and prevention and awareness, First and foremost, I believe what we have to do in order to address this epidemic is education, knowledge. Knowledge is a powerful weapon, and we need to make sure that parents and children are educated as to the dangerous nature of opioid medication, how addictive this medication is, because what you're going to hear is that many people believe that the use of Percocet, Oxycontin, Vicodin is not addictive, and that they may even have been told that by the medical profession. But now we know how addictive it is, so we need to make sure that our schools, we need to make sure that our parents know these facts. One way we've done so in Delaware County through the Heroin Task Force is bringing NOPE into all of our school districts. We met with the intermediate unit, which is all 15 school districts in Delaware County, including here in Radnor Township. And we explained to them that you need this presentation for the students, and all superintendents agreed to have NOPE. So it is throughout the school. But I have to say, at this point in time, as we're addressing this epidemic, NOPE is not enough, that we need to go back to the superintendents. We may even need to introduce legislation in Pennsylvania mandating, as part of every school's curriculum, education on opioids and the dangers of opioids and how it leads to heroin addiction. And so I know I've been speaking to various representatives, and they're considering sitting down and talking about mandating it as part of the core curriculum in our schools. But I believe that our schools should look at this issue now and start incorporating education without having that mandate. And I know some schools throughout Delaware County are considering this in one form or another, and it wouldn't be difficult to make it part of a health class or a gym class, and that's what we're suggesting, and making sure the parents have access to the information that they know. So education, I believe, in this battle is key. Also key is going to be what Dave's talking about on the recovery end, making sure that there's enough financial resources placed into treatment and recovery. But the Heroin Task Force looked at this issue and has been addressing the issue with education, but we also, as Commissioner Clark has indicated, put prevention efforts by placing medicine drop boxes in every single police station, but not just the police stations. We placed them in the hospitals throughout Delaware County, and we've also created this van that goes around. So even if you're unable to get to the police station or unable to get to the hospital, you can call on this van, and it comes to community events, it comes to shredding days, it comes to business events. And if you want to bring your medication, we would take it at these events. But I'll go beyond that, and I'll tell you that if I had a resident call and that resident said, hey, I want to give my prescription medication, I know that the Radnor PD would probably come and gladfully pick that up as a service to those residents. But even in communities that don't have easy access to a great police department like Radnor, we're willing to come and pick up the medication ourselves through our criminal investigation division or through this van. So we don't want you to keep medicine in your house if you're not using it, because we know that the statistics tell us that 70% of the young individuals, the students, the teens that have become addicted have done so by taking the medication out of either their mom and dad's medicine cabinet or their grandmom and grandpop's medicine cabinet or their nightstand, unused medication that we're storing maybe after a surgery, maybe after some type of injury that they sustained, that they were lawfully prescribed the drug. So we want to make sure that medicine is removed out of the home, making sure that nobody is tempted. We even know from talking to a realtor who's part of our task force that people will go into open houses and they will look for medicine, prescription medication, opioids, in medicine cabinets in a home that they are pretending that they're interested in purchasing. They'll go into the nightstand, they'll go into the medicine cabinet or anywhere else where they think medicine would be stored, and that's what they've been doing now for a number of years. And we tend to tell people that are putting their house on the open market and having an open house, remove your jewelry, remove your guns, but now we have to tell them, remove your prescription medications, because there's that type of drug-seeking dependent behavior where they're going in trying to get those type of medications. So we've come a long way in trying to educate individuals as to how to safely dispose and get rid of medicine so it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, but we still have a long way to go. Another effort by the Heroin Task Force was, of course, as again referenced, is the Naloxone, nasal Narcan. Today, I'm happy to report to the residents that our police departments across Delaware County, and including here in Radnor Township, that the police departments have administered over 900 doses since the program began. So that speaks volumes that 900 times, over 900 times, they have come to the scene of a person overdosing near death, and the officers have used nasal Narcan to actually use this life-saving drug to bring that person back. Unfortunately, on some occasions, and fortunately that the officers were there, they had to bring a person back a number of times. Now, it doesn't happen too often, but it happens on occasions where the same person will have attempted to overdose, and it's happened more than once. These officers have gone well beyond the call of duty, and here in Radnor and across Delaware County, we're so proud of the officers because they didn't have to step up and carry the drug. They could have turned and said, this is not our responsibility, it's more of a function of the paramedics. But they didn't do that. They came forward when we had our meeting, when we asked them to do so. Every single chief of police, including Superintendent Carollo, came forward and said that we're going to allow our officers to carry this life-saving drug and help try to save individuals so that we can get them into treatment and recovery, so we can get them to the hospital and then have the information provided to them in treatment and recovery, and hopefully that would be the last day that they use. We know that on many occasions that's not realistic, but we hope that that's the last day that they use. We hope that this near-death experience will bring them forward to try to start a better life and a more productive life. And so we do try to get them into recovery, as Councilman White will explain later, but there's times that that they do and there's times that they don't. But we don't give up on them. We understand that they're under difficult conditions. We understand that they're severely addicted. We understand that we're fighting a situation where the addiction is so overpowering for these individuals that they make poor choices. But we in law enforcement will not give up. The first save was actually occurred in Ridley Township, and it was almost by accident it occurred because we had just given out all of the doses to all of our police departments across Delaware County, and the law didn't go into effect until Thanksgiving weekend back at the end of 2014. And I got a call right before Thanksgiving weekend, and it was an officer that raised a lot of concerns to me. And he says, I have to talk to you about something. And I said, what? Because I was worried about what he was going to tell me. I really thought he was going to tell me I'm not for officers carrying naloxone and I don't want to do it. But what he told me is, I got a call last night, a father that was frantic. I came to the house. He was crying, the father. He said, run into the living room. His son was sprawled out on the couch. He was turning blue. He was starting to breathe shallow breaths and gurgling noises. And I ran back to my car. I pulled out the nasal Narcan. I ran and I sprayed it into his nose. And immediately he started coming back to life. Immediately he started breathing. Immediately he started becoming conscious again. Because I couldn't believe how this drug immediately saved that person's life. And we got him to the hospital, and the father was so ecstatic that we saved his son's life. But he said, the law doesn't go into effect for 2 more days. Did I commit a crime? And I said to him, no, you did a great thing. And that was the first save in the state of Pennsylvania. And it was right here in Delaware County because we have such outstanding officers. And we're lucky as residents here in Radnor and as residents of Delaware County to have such great police departments that are willing to go the extra mile, that are willing to go and do what they have to do to save people and to help families stay together. So I'm going to conclude with that. and turn it over to Commissioner Clark and then my colleague, Councilman White, to explain further efforts of the Heroin Task Force, and so that I can answer any questions at the end and not monopolize any more time.
No, that's good info. Thank you, District Attorney Jack Whalen. So the District Attorney is obviously the top law enforcement official in the county. So he looks at it from a county government perspective, a county law enforcement perspective. Councilman White is on County Council, which is the governing body of 5 members for Delaware County. So County Councilman White will look at this from a slightly different perspective. Maybe I'm not gonna tell him how he sees this, of course, but he sees it from more a legislative policy perspective. So with that, Councilman White, if you can share with us your experience with this, please.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate you having this forum tonight, and thank you all for coming here tonight. It is incredibly important. This is epidemic. It's not just epidemic in Delaware County. As the District Attorney stated, it's across our Commonwealth, it's across our country. And we have to continue fighting and winning this battle against this epidemic. And we have had some great success stories, and I'm going to share a couple of them with you tonight. As the District Attorney Whalen has stated, once Narcan was in each police car, once the saves started piling up with Narcan, we knew we had to get outside our mission statement. We knew we had to expand what the role of the Heroin Task Force was going to be. And that role had to be getting these people that we're saving to the road to recovery. That's an important, if not the most important part. So we started developing partnerships throughout our county. And one great partner is Crozier Hospital, their health system. They've done an incredible job working with the Heroin Task Force. We worked together to get a $1 million grant so they could open 52 beds that were specifically for drug addiction and alcohol addiction. 52 beds. We opened that in April. Unfortunately, a week after that's opened, not one bed has been empty. Every one have been filled 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's how deep this goes. That's the roots of this epidemic and this disease, quite frankly. We also started with certified recovery specialists. Now, these recovery specialists are two individuals we started with, and that was April a year ago. And all they do is visit those that are addicted, whether it be going to a hospital after someone does overdose and is taken in the ambulance to a hospital. They will go see that victim, and they will try to get them into a recovery program. They will work with the family, with the victim, to get the insurance they need. If they don't have private insurance, we'll work with the state as well as the federal government to get them the insurance, to get them into a bed and get them into the recovery program. I stated about 1.5 years ago, we started with 2 recovery specialists. We now have 6 recovery specialists. And we are taking 8 calls a day for these specialists. We've expanded their roles. We now will take calls even from families anywhere in Delaware County. They will go out to the house, the home. If you're in crisis, or you think one of your loved ones, one of your friends are in crisis, you can call them now. They will come out to the home and try to work with you and develop a plan to get that person, again, in some kind of recovery program, on their way to recovery, on their way to being a great, productive citizen. Again, they need to want to do it as well, though. And they will explain that to you, and they will sit down with you and help you get to that point. When we get into recovery, we started 2 programs. We found out when you're an addict, you commit petty crimes. You commit crimes that you wouldn't normally do as if you were not addicted to a drug. If you weren't addicted to a drug that you had to steal from cars, from vehicles, dimes, quarters, nickels, dollars, a laptop, if you will, to support your habit. But what we found at the court level, and working with our courts, our judges have done a great job with us, as part of there are some judges on the heroin task force. We found there was a delay for these people being arrested for these crimes. There was about a 4 to 6 months delay from the time you're arrested and you go in front of your district justice, if you will, and then go to Court of Common Pleas and media. 4 to 6 months. What do you think they do in those 4 to 6 months while they're waiting to be sentenced or tried? They're going right back through that revolving door again. They're going right back to committing more crimes, more theft, to help their habit, help their addiction. So we came up with a program. It's the first in the state. It's called Second Chance Court. What we do now to somebody that we know is just petty crime, we don't do any serious crimes. We got to know them, and we know what kind of crime it is. Right at the district justice level, we will help them get into a program immediately. As part of their bond, we will help them get in a program. We will find a recovery program. We'll find a bed. If they don't stick with that program, their bond gets revoked. But that's cut down recovery from 6 months down to hours sometimes after being arrested. That's how critical it is to get them help immediately. Otherwise, it's just going to be the same cycle over and over again. That court, we just had a meeting with the president judge today. That court was developed through the Heroin Task Force, through District Attorney Whalen and his office, as well as the judges, through a grant from the state. It's a trial program. It's quite frankly what it was. And there was an age limit on that trial program. It was up to 26 years old. Today, the president judge just informed us that the success rate is so good on that court that we've gone to the state and asked them to remove the age limit. He believes he'll be very successful. He believes the state will approve having that age limit removed. So we'll be able to do this to everyone, hopefully sooner rather than later. Again, once you made that decision to get into a recovery house, get into a recovery, move on the road, we also found out that because of these petty thefts, a lot of the addicted people were having trouble getting jobs. And the people having trouble, quite frankly, were women having trouble. Men weren't having as much problems getting jobs because a lot of men go into the trades, go into carpentry, go into steam fitting, if you will, go into construction, become a laborer. It's obviously easier. There's not the background checks done in a lot of those trades. But if you're a woman in recovery and you want to go work in a bank or you want to go work in an office building and you want to work with other people, personnel, maybe work in an accounting office, they were getting the door shut in their face, quite frankly. They were actually going, they were interviewing, they thought they had a job, they'd never hear back. When they'd follow up, they would tell them, we did a background check and you have this arrest. We cannot have you work here. So District Attorney Whalen and myself, as well as the Heroin Task Force, worked along with the Chamber of Commerce, worked along with Delaware County's Workforce Development Program, and we started another program because we saw the need. We called it Second Chance Employment. We are now targeting a recovery home. It actually is a recovery home called MVP. It's a recovery home that does men and boys. This one, men and women, excuse me. This one does women, it's only. And we hired a company through a grant, through the Heroin Task Force and the two offices. They go in and they meet with these women. They go in, they help them write their resumes. They help them do through the interview process so they interview better. And through our chamber, we're able to work with our businesses to open the doors, let them understand that this is a good person that was in a bad situation. It's not a bad person. It's been incredibly successful. District Attorney Whalen and I rolled that out, I guess, about 6 weeks ago. The women were literally crying because for the first time, and in their words, they felt they had hope and they had opportunity. I can't imagine going through recovery being 9 months recovered, long-term recovery too, 9 months recovered, and being told, we can't hire you because of your addiction. They made the hardest decision in their life, they stuck with it, and then couldn't get employment so they could continue recovery. This program's been incredibly successful, and we've had a lot of buy-in from our chamber. The businesses in Delaware County have been excellent. District Attorney Whalen and I have a meeting, I think it's next week, with another company that wants to absolutely mentor these women, a Delaware County resident. And it's been, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people off on the road, get them recovered, and get them to be part of our community again. Leads us up to, and this was discussion that we've been talking for months, and I know District Attorney Whalen, when we do these forums, as he had stated, throughout the county, and inevitably somebody asks, why don't you go after the pharmacies? Why don't you go where it all starts? At that time, we were looking at things, but it just didn't happen. About a month ago, Delaware County became the first county to sue the pharmaceuticals. We are going to go right to the source of where this is manufactured, where this is made. The lawsuit is like a novel, 280 some pages. And it spells out and shows that these pharmaceuticals colluded, they were deceitful in their sales practices. They told the doctors these drugs were not addictive. Literally told the doctors they are not addictive drugs. You can prescribe them, and you can prescribe them safely. They knew they were. We all know they are. That's just a fact. As I said, it's like a novel. It's on our website. If you have an opportunity, read through it. You can see exactly what their plan was. Their plan was to sell pills. Of all the opioids manufactured in the world, all of them, 80% of those opioids are sold in the United States. Throughout the whole world, 80%. That's an incredible amount of opioids right here in the United States. And why? Because we have the money, we have the opportunity, we have the insurance to be able to do that. We're going after these pharmaceuticals for two reasons. They need to be held accountable for what they've done. The taxpayers, your money, we've been spending year after year after year trying to get ahead of this program, trying to get ahead of this epidemic, and without any much success. As Jack Whalen has stated, we are still seeing deaths creep up. Now, I will tell you a good stat, that rise has dropped considerably as compared to surrounding areas. But we're also going to get that money and to use it for recovery. That's the most important thing now. If we stopped, we believe if we stopped, they stopped manufacturing pills today, we'd have a problem for the next 10 years. Getting people recovered, getting them off this, the opioids, getting them off the heroin so they can be lead productive lives. They're the ways we are trying to think outside the box. Jack Whalen and I started the Heroin Task Force back in 2012 when everybody was hiding, quite frankly, their head in the sand. There wasn't any Heroin Task Force in the surrounding counties. We started it. I think it's been a model for the state. I know the governor's been down here to see what ideas we have that he can try to implement them at the state. And this is an epidemic that affects anyone. It knows no socioeconomic background. That nobody's immune to this. Rich, poor, you go to school, 4.0 student, you flunk out of school, makes no difference. Men, women, makes no difference. 2 years ago, the youngest was 18, the oldest was 65. That's what this epidemic is all about. We will continue fighting this. As I said, we hired a lawyer. He is being paid on contingency, so he's only going to get paid if he wins the money and wins the lawsuit for us to save the taxpayers' monies. I believe he will be successful. He believes we have a great case. So we will keep you informed on that, but I can guarantee you this, District Attorney Whalen and myself will continue this fight, and we will win this war. and I've said this probably no less than 100 times. We have to win this war. We have no choice. And that's the reason we have to. We're losing hundreds of people a year to this, and that has to stop. Again, I thank you for doing this, Commissioner Clark. It's important. Please get the message out. And I will tell you this, and I say this at every forum, one way you can be part of the solution and part of helping this is go home tonight. Any pills that are in your drug box, your medicine cabinet, your drawers, get them out. Bring them up to the police station. They have a drop box here. As District Whalen and Attorney Whalen stated, give us a call. We'll come pick them up. But if they're in your medicine cabinet or in your medicine drawers, they're going to end up in somebody's hands. That's the way we have to think. So if you don't need them, please get rid of them. Thank you for having me tonight.
And thank you, Councilman. And your efforts at the county level have been fantastic and outstanding. We appreciate that. So thank you for that. And if you don't know where the drop box is, it's downstairs by the vending machines. If you know where they are, leading into the police department down there, you can come in anytime and drop them off. There's never any questions asked or anything. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Sergeant Joe Pinto to give us the perspective from the local law enforcement agency, Radnor Township, which, having worked with them in my capacity as commissioner for 2 years, I can tell you they are fantastic. I get no complaints. I only get compliments. So thank you for coming tonight, Sergeant, and thank you for all that you do, because you all are loved by the community.
Commissioner, thank you. District Attorney Whalen, Councilman White, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to present the law enforcement side of it. Just to follow up on what both Commissioner White and District Attorney Whalen said, here in Radnor Township, when it comes to heroin, there is no stereotype. It's men, it's women, it's black, it's white, it's rich, it's poor. We've seen it all from people ODing and dying in the small housing project we have up in South Wayne to people ODing and dying in $1 million homes in some of the richer neighbors of the township. Prior to 2013 and the arrival of Chief Superintendent Colarulo and his supervisory staff, drugs in Radnor Township were handled on a street level. If an officer was out there and he encountered something, he came across something on his own, or we got a call about a situation, we would go and we would handle it, and the person who would be in possession of the drugs would be the person who'd go to jail. After the arrival of Chief Colarulo and his leadership staff, he decided to take action and made us, the township, part of the drug task force that District Attorney Whalen spoke of. We have 4 members of the department are assigned to that unit, and we also do the narcotics here in the township. From that day on, our focus has been not just to get the people who have the drugs, but our focus is to go after the people that are dealing the drugs. Sometimes I think law enforcement gets a bum rap. We're just trying to put people in jail and punish people that have addiction or disease, and that's not the case. As Councilman White said, getting these people into the court system and the programs they have is the best thing for them. But ultimately, our goal is to stop the drugs at the source. So that's what we focus. With the training we get from the county and our experience, we can now use the skills we have, investigative techniques that we developed to track down these people, make purchases in an undercover capacity, and arrest them and put them in jail. And ironically, at least in Radnor Township side, overwhelmingly the people that are selling this poison, they don't use it. So they're actually just preying on these people who are victims. So that's one of the key points I want to get out, that just because we are on the law enforcement side, we still want to help the people that have the addiction, and we focus on the people that are selling them. In reference to the ancillary crimes that were spoken about just here in Radnor Township, some of the ancillary crimes that we've seen directly related to drugs range everywhere from thefts from cars, in cars, retail thefts, frauds, up to and including burglary of residential homes. And it's all in an effort just to get money, get objects that they can turn into money, and they can purchase the drug that they need to continue their habit. People tell us all the time that there's not drugs in Radnor and the people in Radnor don't sell drugs. Well, a lot of that is true. The people that we encounter that are pushing this poison don't necessarily come from Radnor, but they come into Radnor and they sell to our residents. Okay, so the dealer may not be somebody on your street or in your neighborhood, but there's probably somebody on your street or in your neighborhood that's calling these people in to come into our township and sell drugs. And they're not just selling drugs. We had the opportunity to take a subject into custody, and it turned out that he had a federal warrant for a laundry list of crimes, and everything from violent crime to dealing with drugs and everything else. So this is the type of people that are coming into our community selling these drugs. Just some general statistics, if I may. And like I said, prior to 2013, we didn't keep as accurate stats that we do now. We started doing the stats after we became the unit. In 2013, when we started, we recorded 6 incidents, and this is specifically involving just heroin. In 2016, it reached a total number of 27. Year to date, just prior to the halfway point of 2017, we've had 11 heroin incidences. In 2016, we had Narcan usage. We used Narcan 4 times by the officers. In 2017, again, just prior to the halfway point, we've already used it 6 times. And just as an aside, I've had the opportunity to use the Narcan, and through no action of my own, you truly save lives. And the way District Attorney Whalen explained it is exactly the way it is. You take a person who is very obviously near death or rapidly dying, and within minutes they're up calling you all kinds of foul names because you took their high away. But the truth is they're alive, and somebody's grateful. Their mom's grateful, their dad's grateful, their sisters or brothers are grateful, and they get another shot. In 2016, 2016, we had 5 overdose to heroin alone, 5 deaths. And 2017, prior to the halfway point, again, we've only had 1, and I believe I can contribute that to the use of the Narcan and the Narcan being on presence. There are 2 deaths still outstanding that we're waiting for toxicology reports on. 1 has subsequently come back, and gratefully the lady is still gone, unfortunately, but it was not an overdose, and I haven't gotten information on the other one yet, but we pretty strong belief that that one will be an opioid-related death. I apologize, I'm not a public speaker, so if I'm all over the place, I apologize, but one of the things—
You're doing great, Sergeant.
Thanks. One of the things that we see, the biggest side effect of this opioid epidemic, as far as we see, is, quite frankly, the effect that it has on the other drugs. It's okay to do other drugs now because, oh, I'm not doing heroin. So, if I want to smoke marijuana, or I want to do cocaine, or I want to, do some shade, or I want to do this, I want to do that. It doesn't matter because they're not doing heroin, they're not doing opiates. And obviously, as a parent myself, it blows my mind that someone can actually say that it's okay to do this because I'm not doing that. And the other thing is why the statistics that were put forth by the district attorney are overwhelming, and they're not actively here in Radnor Township to the scale that it is throughout the rest of the county. It's coming, and it will continue to come without the efforts of groups like this and the district attorney and the councilman, Commissioner Clark, and unfortunately the law enforcement. We're the side of it that nobody really wants to deal with because we have to arrest your sons, your daughters, your neighbors, your stuff like that. But it's all a process, and it's all a team effort, and we are part of that team. And enforcement is a strong side of that. And I believe it's important for especially a community like Radnor to get out in front of it, be stalwart against it, and don't let it come and take over our communities to the degrees that it has in other areas of the community and definitely throughout the state. So that's all I have right now. If anybody has any questions when the time comes, I'll be glad to do my best. And I thank you, Commissioner, for the time.
Sure. And Sergeant, if I remember correctly from the reports that we get, that we read, it seems like there's a lot of interdepartmental cooperation with, so you mentioned the four officers that are in the unit with the Delaware County Heroin Task Force. It seems like there's a lot of cooperation throughout the county, though, with Radnor and other departments. We do.
It's fantastic. When you do these things, people don't understand the time that's involved in this. I mean, you try to get as much background information on the people that that you're dealing with, because you're sending somebody in an undercover capacity. So you want to know everything you can know about this person, what the level of risk is. And then when the time comes to arrest people, we are primarily the Radnor Police Department, and we have responsibilities and obligations that come before this. So we never have a problem. We reach out to the other members of the county task force, and we have officers come up as close as from Marple and Haverford to as far as ways from the city of Chester and Upper Darby, and actual detectives from the county themselves. They'll come up, they'll help us with surveillance, they'll help us with information gathering, they help us with actually making the arrest and taking down these individuals when the time comes to arrest them. That's the cooperation we have throughout the county, and just inside the police department, it goes the same way. Because now, like I said, prior to 2013, instead of this officer making these arrests and keeping his paperwork to himself, I get emails all day, every day, whether it's from the traffic highway unit on speed checks, and they stop a car and it's got a bunch of pills in it, or if it's got marijuana in it, or the driver is intoxicated by anything other than alcohol, it comes to me. The detective unit, when they're working cases and they got a burglary or they got a car break-in, and they say, hey, we really think this guy is doing this because he's an addict, and they'll send me the email, and we start working it, seeing what we can come out of it, see who we can track it down to, who's bringing that into our township. And it goes the other way. A lot of times we will arrest these people, and whether they're reluctant or they don't want to give up their drug information, they're able to give us other information. Hey, I know this guy who's breaking into cars in Haverford and Radnor, or I know this guy who breaks into houses, and I don't know if he's been in Radnor or not. So doing this helps us to focus on the drugs in our township, but it also opens up avenues for crime in a lot of other different ways. And personally, I've had the opportunity to make a lot of friendships, a lot of relationships from a law enforcement standpoint, that I know that there's a lot of things that I don't know, and there's a lot of problems that come up that I haven't seen or I can't handle. But I know I can call this guy, he does it all the time, or I can call this guy who knows that guy. So the networking is phenomenal, the cooperation is phenomenal, and it truly needs to be, because as the Councilman White said, if they stop today, the problem's not over. It's going to take a long, and you know they're not going to stop today. It's going to take a long time to get back on top of this, and law enforcement needs to be a key aspect and a key proponent of that. So, thank you.
Thanks, Sergeant. That was great. Appreciate it. So this issue obviously does not stop at the governmental level, but we have a number of educational institutions in the township. So I was very happy to be contacted by Colonel Church, who said that he wanted to get involved too and get his perspective out there on this. Obviously, he is the president of Valley Forge Military Academy and College. So this is something that these institutions have to deal with and have to address as well. So with that being said, Colonel Church.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark, for asking me to be a part of this effort this evening. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, very much for your presence. I'd like to thank the other participants for their time here as well. We'd all like to be home with our families, but we are working here to make a difference. It's very important. And like Luke, Mary Kay and I are blessed with 4 young children. Although I look old as dirt, we have 4 young children. I'm most humbled to be in your presence because I probably know less than these gentlemen that are beside me. But when it comes to this scourge that is impacting our community, our country, our Commonwealth, and our county, we all have to come together. However, having served in Afghanistan, I've seen firsthand the brutal aspects of a drug culture out of control, a horrid epidemic in nature, and I would do everything in my power to prevent this type of reality from existing here. Now, I'm no longer on patrol, or am I pursuing an enemy? I am in a new position, blessed to be in a position to fight ignorance and apathy, and I mean to do so with just as much energy as I would when I carried a rifle in Marja, Afghanistan. My mission here is different. Marine leaders always know their mission. The mission of Valley Forge Military Academy and College is to educate cadets within an academic and military environment to be fully prepared for their responsibilities as citizen leaders who are mentally alert, sound in body, considerate of others, and possessed of the highest sense of duty, honor, loyalty, and courage. Nowhere in that mission statement is there room for substance use disorder or drugs. So institutionally, my concerns are threefold. First, we always want to ensure that we do everything we can to provide our cadets a safe and secure environment wherein they can execute our mission. We have already formed strong, professional, and effective relationships with the wonderful Radnor Police Department, and we're most grateful for their assistance in addressing these issues and challenges one would expect at any institution of higher learning full of young people who are finding their way. Second, I am responsible to ensure our staff and faculty have all they deserve and need to enjoy wellness in the workplace, always keeping in mind the potential destruction to lives as it pertains to this plague. And lastly, I would like to see Valley Forge Military Academy and College be part of a more broad effort that serves all the citizens of Radnor. And just a reminder to all of you, the first iteration of Valley Forge was in the old Devon Hotel 90 years ago, and a fire destroyed the hotel and the original Valley Forge Military Academy. The good citizens of Radnor took in our cadets, faculty, and staff, many of whom had lost everything. And we were able to start anew where we are today. That offered, we owe you, the citizens of Radnor. And if we can help in any way, the 90th Corps of Cadets, our faculty and staff, stand ready to do so. This evening, I've been here to listen and learn. I'm also here this evening to offer up the Valley Forge Military Academy and College Corps of Cadets, our Forge family, to be part of the solution of this challenge. As I understand it, this darkness takes 90 lives a day. If we were losing 90 Marines a day in any battle, I can promise you that any officer of Marines would do all he or she could to disrupt the enemy. And this plague is the enemy. And we all agree we need to disrupt it now. If you want to have our local schools have a substance use disorder awareness stand-down day, I don't give a crap what you call it, wherein we bring in expert after expert after expert to speak directly to this issue, Valley Forge will support that effort. If you want to bring in recovering addicts into our schools to meet and speak with young people for an entire week, call it a recovery week, and have them share their honest, heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching stories, Valley Forge will support that action. If you want a member of our team to be a part of a more broad effort to seek solutions, Valley Forge will support that action. If you want to try anything new and different that no one else has tried before, Valley Forge will be a part of that action. This evening is a great first step, and again, I am humbled to be in your presence, and I'm very grateful, and I thank each and every one of you. Here's my message. You can count on us to forge a solution. We stand ready. Thank you.
And thank you, Colonel Church. It's greatly appreciated, and obviously the perspective from the institutions is vital to understand here. With all the college students that we have in here, they make up, I think, a third of our population when they're all here. So obviously it's something we're very concerned about. And sitting immediately to my left is my neighbor, Steve Graham Jr., and I was excited when he reached out to me voluntarily when he got notice of this, and he said, I'm going to share my experience with this because I went through this. So, you know, for me, I'm excited to hear that side because while we can sit up here and talk about what we're doing, you know, at the township level, at the county level, law enforcement, what we're trying to do to stop this, obviously you can't stop it until you understand it. And I think we can get some insight from someone who has been through it, did make it through it, and is a very successful individual with a lovely family and a great business here in Radnor. So with that, Steve, if you can give us some if you can tell us about your experience, I think that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke, and thank you guys for having me. I don't have anything prepared, but you know, in AA we share our experience, and that's what I can plan to do today. I guess traditionally you would have never thought like the kid that went to Malvern and Cornell and had all the things given to him and the most steps, you know, was born on second base, whatever you might call, would be the guy that ends up on drugs. But when you're talking about opiates and painkillers, that it, you know, as these guys have mentioned before, it really doesn't care who you are. I, much like many other people, started out when I was in college. I had a bunch of surgeries from different injuries and issues, and when we were in high school, DARE didn't talk, nobody knew about painkillers and Oxycontin, and I'd never even heard of it. So I graduated high school in 2003. The lawsuits that were brought against pharmaceutical companies that they've already paid out took place, I think, in 2007. So talk about like a time period when we didn't know anything about this. So my father was an alcoholic. He's been sober for 30 years, so it's something in my genes. Oddly enough, I don't really care for alcohol, but my drug of choice was downers, so opiates and marijuana. And a lot of that really took place at Cornell. I was stressed, high stress environment, and that was kind of my way of, after I found out about it through these surgeries, my way of, I guess, decompressing after school. And at that point, it was something where you only took it on weekends, and it was casual and it was fun and all, but you quickly find out that the more you take it, the more you need it because you start feeling sick and you get the withdrawals. And that's something I think people, my dad never understood. He's like, why can't you just stop? Like for drinking, he's like, why can't you just stop? Well, it's not like, I can go to work if I have my drugs, but I can't if I don't. So it's like, it's a really hard thing when somebody needs you to keep your job, you have your bills to pay. What the alternative is, you get sick, you're sick for 2 weeks, or you gotta go to rehab, whatever it might be, or you keep using, you go to work and you keep your job. So it's really hard when people are forced to or are put in a position where I really wanted to get clean. It just wasn't that easy. Fortunately, I avoided law enforcement. I never got in any trouble. So I never went to rehab, but I did struggle through my young 20s trying to figure out how to get clean. I always wanted to get clean. I had a great family, a great life. But again, this is at a point where this was not something people knew about. There was very few resources in terms of how to get clean. And I went through a lot of different ones, different doctors. One doctor was a quack who really was just in it for the money. And had me all sorts of, he put me on benzos to get off oxys, which is another horrible addiction. Fortunately, I didn't really like them, but it didn't really make sense. And as I said, this whole time I wanted to get clean, but I just kept going back to using because it was easy. I was a high functioning addict. I had a great job. I had enough money. Part of it was I grew up in the restaurant business, so I worked in the restaurant business, which is not a great atmosphere if you're having an addictive personality. So part of my way out of it was trying to get in a different career, which I was lucky to do. But even then, I still kept using because that addiction is so strong. And I think one of the things that a lot of parents really struggle with is that, like, this is their child. They think, why is he acting like this? Why is he doing this? Well, it's not your child anymore. It is opiates have taken over. I did things. I stole. I did things I would never have done in my life that I did on drugs. And I think my mom never understood that. But again, it took over. It literally takes over your brain. I cared about nothing. To me, survival was getting my next high, because it really was. Otherwise, I was sick. I couldn't do anything. So 90% of my day was put towards texting the drug dealer, getting down to the city before work, getting down to the city after work. And to these guys' points, I think one of the biggest issues that why Ridley and Chester have the issue, it's how close you are to the city. It's the availability of the drug. And so, I spent hours driving to and from the city to get my high. But fortunately, I had a very, very supportive family. And after years of getting clean for a couple of days or a month at some point, I finally got involved with a couple great doctors. And the way I got clean and sober, my dad thought rehab was a paid vacation. So I actually went to AA, even though AA kind of tends to frown, depending on the group, on drug addicts. But fortunately, my dad was in AA, so I kind of had like a little bit of a favor going on for me there. I went to 3 meetings a day. I went to 2 doctor's appointments a day. I took Suboxone because I didn't go to rehab. And to a couple points, as I spoke to the chaplain, I think Suboxone gets a bad rap because it's given to addicts and they also abuse it. But it saved my life, and I make sure to say that to a lot of people. When it's used properly as one tool in your tool belt, it can be a lifesaver, but it can't be the only thing you depend on to get clean. You have to use that drug to give you the time to learn how to change your behavior. And that is what you do by going to meetings and going to your doctor's appointments if you can't go to rehab. So that's how I got clean. It didn't happen overnight. I struggled with that for a few months before my wife, after me struggling, decided to move out, which for me was rock bottom. And that's another point to make. Nobody's going to get clean until they've really hit rock bottom. You can force it. You can call. I get guys call me once a week. They're from parents. Can you talk to my son? And I'll pick up the phone. I'll take the phone call, and I can tell right there if the guy's ready. If he's not crying, ready to get down dirty, he's not ready to get clean. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. The drug and the high is much stronger than the will to get clean, unless you have really gotten to the point where you've either encountered an overdose situation, which a lot of times isn't even rock bottom for a lot of these guys. And I laughed when you said that guys curse you when you give them the Narcan, because you're really, they're, in their mind, you just stole their high, that they've just spent all day trying to get. And they've probably been close to death before and gotten away with it, so they think, why do you do this to me? So that's how strong the drug is and the addiction is. And, you know, it takes a lot hitting that rock bottom to really want to make a change. As I said, I always wanted to make the change. It just wasn't always easy. But when my wife moved out under my mom's direction, which I love them both for doing, I never held any grudge for it. Really was like the time for me that I woke up. And from that day, 6 years ago, I've been clean, and with the support of my family. So I think it's important that parents don't give up, but at the same time, you have to understand that he might not be ready, or she might not be ready. And I've also lost a few good friends to it, but I've also have a few good friends who've also made it out. So there's different ways to do it. I don't think 30 days rehab is enough. So if you have a friend or family who's being advised to do 30 days, it's not going to be enough. If that person's been using for years, 30 days is not enough to change the way you've been living for years. I think 90 days minimum is where a true opiate heroin addict that's been using for a while at least needs 90 days. Unfortunately, it's very expensive unless you get into a good program that a judge sends you to. It's hard to find a bed that's cheap. And so that's kind of my feeling on rehab. Again, I've never been, so my experience is limited, but I have a lot of friends that did 30 days, and they just did it because their parents wanted them to. As soon as they were out, they were using, and as soon as they were out, they used really a lot, and they overdosed, so that's another challenge when you get out of rehab. But I'm really grateful to be here and be clean. And as I said, I try and help as many kids as possible. I still go to doctors. I still do as much as I can. And if anybody here needs help or has somebody or a son that, in AA, we only do guys and guys. So if you have a daughter, I'm sure I know somebody can help them, but I'm not really their mentor. Yeah, so that's my experience, and happy to help out any way I can.
Thanks for the insight, Steve. That's I think that's really helpful, giving the other side of you know what we're talking about here. Maybe not the other side, but certainly the other perspective. So from my perspective, like I said, I'm fortunate enough not to have anybody personally that I know who's been affected by this or who has suffered from this disease. So I've been fortunate in that respect. I see it, like I said before, there's three ways that I look at this, and the first one is being the father of three young children. So Colonel Church has one more than me, but they're 6, 4, and they're 2. So the question is, what do we do? What do we do? What do my wife and I do, and the rest of our family, frankly, to keep this from happening? And I think District Attorney Whalen and Councilman White, said it very passionately. You have to get rid of the leftover. That's the first thing we're going to do, is get rid of any leftover painkillers, and hopefully even the step beforehand to stay away from it. So it's easy for me to say, but if my children were to undergo some sort of surgery or something, obviously you'd like to stay away from it and stick with Tylenol 3 or something as much as you can, of course, right? So, of course, if they're wincing and crying in pain, it's probably be harder for me to say. But so that's and my wife and I have talked about that. That's something we would do, is try to stay away from the painkillers if we had to get them, very limited, and to get rid of them immediately as soon as possible. And also to watch the kids. I went to, Steve's a Malvern Prep grad, I'm a Haverford School grad. I graduated in 2001, and I remember my friends all had a lot more money than me, so they had nice houses with basements and everything. We didn't have a basement, so we had nowhere to hide from my parents, so my friends never wanted to come over to my house, so I went to theirs. And yeah, we'd hang out in the basement unsupervised, and what do you think was going on down there? And I had two very good friends, both one from near the reservoir in Newtown Square, one from here in Radnor, and one ended up in jail on continual probation violations because he couldn't get off of it, and the other one I know went to jail for a couple DUIs because he couldn't get off of, and they were both painkillers that led to heroin for both of them. So it's scary, but also supervising as much as is humanly possible. possible because my friends were not supervised. They weren't, and they were allowed to do whatever they wanted, and it was fun, but it obviously led to some issues down the road. So, those are the things for me as a father, as a commissioner. We want to keep it out of our community. Now, we have the top of first line defense with Radnor PD. They are all over this, and as I stated, when we look at the reports that come in from law enforcement before our meetings, there is a lot of activity outside the township with other police departments. And what that tells me is, at least looking at it from our township perspective, Radnor PD is being proactive in trying to go after this before it even comes in. And obviously, you'd hope the same is taking place with all local law enforcement. But also, there is cooperation amongst these different law enforcement agencies, which is huge, exchanging information and everything that comes along with that. In terms of what I can do, on my list, and the Board of Health did hear some presentations about this. A lot of this is governed at the state level, but we have talked about what we can do at the local level in terms of ordinances and things of that nature, and local initiatives to educate people, which I think is right on, and to let them know how little carfentanil you need in order to kill you, which is pretty much as far as I can tell, how much fentanyl you need, which is a very, very small amount from what I can tell, and to make sure people understand that this is no joke, to get the education out there, and to also address other concerns on the list in terms of local ordinances and things like that. And the other way I see it is professionally. By day, I'm a family domestic lawyer, and I will tell you, it's all I do all day, every day, and I am in custody court probably every other day, and I can tell you I am routinely in court on drug cases where we are dealing with how to get mom or dad, or sometimes both, in which case children and youth then comes in, and that's a whole nother story. But how do we get mom or dad back to being able to parent their children and being trusted by the court and the other parent to be around their children? And there's a variety of things that go on there, but this is at a point where we had, with the Bar Association, we had the custody masters put on a forum about this and how they address it. And someone said, kind of being a little more hardcore, I guess, why do you let people who have an active drug addiction see their kids? And, the custody master said, if we took complete custody away from everybody who had a drug problem that stepped into our courtroom, the majority of people in our courtrooms would not see their kids. So there are supervision remedies. They do tests with hair follicle tests and urinalysis through adult probation and parole. So certainly from the court system, the county court system, which is what I deal with, they are very aggressive with how they address, certainly in custody cases, parents who have these issues while also maintaining the relationship with their children, which they have to do. So that's the three ways that I look at it. And, most importantly, in my capacity as a commissioner, we are aware of the problem, and in as much as we can do about it at the township level with ordinances and things of that nature, we are looking into what we can do about this, and we have heard presentations on it, and it is something that we do see as an issue. So it's not something we've turned a blind eye to, that's for sure. So with that being said, just a couple questions from me, and whoever can answer them feels comfortable with them. Fentanyl, carfentanil, these things, how much does it take to kill you, and is it present here in Delaware County? Is it present here in Radnor?
Fentanyl is present everywhere. Carfentanil, we haven't seen it in Delaware County yet, but it has appeared in Montgomery County. The difference is tremendous. First of all, fentanyl is much more powerful than heroin. Carfentanil is much more powerful than regular fentanyl. Carfentanil is sometimes used to tranquilize elephants. So when someone is using carfentanil, they're not going to make it. There's no way they can make it if they're ingesting carfentanil. Even if the officer gets there very soon, it's going to be very difficult to save that person. I would imagine we would use 10 doses of naloxone, and we still would have a problem saving that person. The stronger the heroin, the stronger the fentanyl, the harder it is to save that individual. We've had the highest, I keep the statistics, the highest was probably out of Haverford Township, where they administered 6 doses of Narcan to one person before they were able to revive that person. But fortunately, they were able to revive that person. In the medical examiner reports that I review, all the toxicology reports tend to indicate a presence of fentanyl when the individual is deceased. Very rare, it's just heroin, but it could be just heroin. Sometimes, in some cases, somebody could be on Suboxone, heroin, and then fentanyl. We've seen a number of combinations through the toxicology reports. But fentanyl and carfentanil, extremely, extremely dangerous. Now, fentanyl does have a useful purpose when it's properly prescribed. It's used usually in hospice cases where individuals are going to die in a number of weeks, and it's to keep them comfortable while they're in the process of dying. But we're seeing it mixed with heroin all the time now coming out. And we can't. The problem is that when someone is taking a drug that's approved by the FDA, like OxyContin, which is a typical opioid that's being used, at least the FDA has approved that to the extent. Of course, the problem is they're abusing the OxyContin. But when they're taking heroin, we don't know what's in that. It's coming from either China or South America. We have no idea what is in that drug. The user has no idea what's in that drug. It could be heroin. It could be heroin and fentanyl. It could be pure fentanyl. It could be carfentanil. We just don't know, and that's the danger. Also, back in the 70s, we heard about heroin. It wasn't a prevalent drug. It was only 10 to 15% pure back then. The heroin today on the market is 90% pure, and that's right here in the Philadelphia region.
And Sergeant Pinto, from what I understand for first responders, this carfentanil, sometimes it's in liquid form, they inhale it, things of that nature, and obviously that can pose major risks for first responders, right?
Absolutely. We've been forced at the direction of the chief to change our entire way in which we handle narcotics, specifically those that we believe are heroin-based. We usually do, we call them field kits, and you do a small amount, and you break some tubes, it does a chemical reaction, it gives you a positive indication for the drug you're looking for. But with the presence of fentanyl and cofentanyl being so prevalent anymore, and the risk, you talk about amounts that you need. There was a case in the state of Ohio where an officer simply dusted off his shirt, and they had a Narcan on 4 separate times, and he spent a couple days in the hospital, was touch and go for a while. Fortunately, I can report that he did live. He's going to be fine. I don't know if he's going to be a policeman anymore. I haven't followed it that far. But to being said, we don't even field test them anymore. We double bag them, we put warning signs on them, and we send it out to the lab and let the professionals deal with it, because it only takes the smallest amount. And just to follow up with what District Attorney Whalen says, we're actually seeing it being put in, fentanyl being mixed in with cocaine sometimes now, just for the fact that it's so addictive and it increases their sales, and it's a different type of high, or God knows what. But yeah, it's out there, and it doesn't take much at all. In fact, we've taken to keeping carfentanil, I'm sorry, I apologize, the Narcan dispensers in our processing area where we log our evidence. And as for my drug guys, I tell my drug guys I don't want them processing evidence by themselves. I want somebody else there with them. And that's just a little extra step we take. You know, you process the evidence, I'm just going to simply be here, watch you, make sure, because then someone can be there to use the Narcan if you have to. So it's something we take incredibly seriously, and you have to.
Sure.
I would just add to that we're very sensitive now to our law enforcement personnel, as well as all of the first responders that would be coming onto the scene. As you have pointed out, some of these drugs can be airborne, or, as indicated, could be touched. So we are in the process, and we're going to announce it shortly, where if any department across Delaware County needs masks and gloves, we are going to provide masks and gloves to them. We also just recently purchased a state-of-the-art piece of equipment that, without even having to open the packaging, we can then tell if what's in that substance is fentanyl or carfentanil, and that's a new piece that no one really has access to at this point in time. And we're going to release that information to the police departments that we have this available. The device also can be used in bomb detecting devices, where we can switch out and determine whether or not there's chemicals in a piece of piping or in a kit that would have potential bomb material in that. So this is a great piece of equipment. We're about to make available to all of our police departments and our bomb squad.
Thank you. And Councilman White, if I remember correctly, you touched on Second Chance Court. Is that right? Correct. And could you describe the interplay or the relationship between that and drug court? Because from what I understand, the drug court's been a successful program too.
Drug court has been a very successful program. That's a court that has been active for a number of years now. District Attorney Whalen uses that court quite often. And drug court is a court that if you do commit a crime, you can go into that court, and it's a long-term recovery court. And correct me, District Attorney Whalen, if I misspeak, but you need, in order to, part of your sentencing is going to recovery. And you need to finish that recovery program in order to finish your sentence. I believe the recovery rate in that is about 84% or thereabouts. So it's an incredibly effective program. It's a program that, as I said, the district attorney has expanded and done a great job on. Second Chance Court is a different animal, as I explained. It's really trying to get recovery quicker to these that are committing these petty crimes. It's just shortening the length of time from 4 to 6 months to, it could be hours, as I said, or a couple days to get help to these people. Both courts only work when the people using these recovery programs want to use these programs. That's important. And as I said, with an 84% success rate in the drug court, we're certainly hoping for that kind of success rate with the Second Chance Court. It's still a new initiative, and we don't have the stats on that as of yet.
Sure. The only thing I would like to add to that is that we have tremendous judges in Delaware County that truly care about the residents of Delaware County. One judge is a Radnor resident, and that's Judge Osborne, who for many years has handled drug treatment court, has been in our criminal court system, now as a senior judge, still working on occasion in drug treatment court. Her daughter, Sarah Armstrong, is with us tonight, and I can only say the care, the consideration. Right now, Judge Hazel's a major judge who's associated with drug treatment court, and he acts like a father to many of these individuals, that he expects that there is going to be some failure in drug treatment court, but we're going to try to work through their failure to make sure that they have the best chance of success. And as Councilman White has indicated, I've been to many drug treatment court graduations. It's amazing to see the transition from the time they go into drug treatment court to the time they graduate in typically 24 months before they complete the program. But when they complete the program, they've beaten their addiction, they're employed, they're back reunited with their families, they're good mom and dads if they have children. So it's an amazing transition. And it's because of the people associated with that program, the judges, the counselors, the probation parole, the members of the behavioral health team that all work together for that great success. So I want to commend Judge Osborne, Judge Hazel for all of their efforts.
And Commissioner, if I could, again, I'll add to District Attorney Whelan's. The only way we're going to beat this epidemic is we all have to be working together. We all have to be in, as the District Attorney stated. Judge Capuzzi is the one that really put together the Second Chance Court. And each judge is very concerned, and they want to see success in there. They are also coming up with initiatives to help the Heroin Task Force get this and beat this addiction.
Thank you. And so those are initiatives within the court setting. And Colonel Church, I know you said you wanted to see some things in the institutional setting. What is the institutional response right now if one of your cadets were to be found with something like this? Obviously, if they're turned over to Radnor PD, we know how that goes. Is there anything within the institution that you take on?
Yes, thank you very much. So we have a medical amnesty program at Valley Forge Military Academy College. So it's incumbent upon the cadet to indicate that he or she has a problem, and that's more of a recovery approach, and we think that's the best way to go. We understand we're dealing with young people, and they're forming decisions and making decisions in their lives. So we try to take the tack whenever possible to get to recovery as quickly as possible. And then for our students that are at the academy, cadets who are at the academy who are 7th through 12th grade. Obviously, we're bringing the parents. For the students, cadets who are at the college, it's a little different because sometimes we're not bringing in the parents because that's the wish of the adult student who wants it that way. So it's a little more complicated. But the medical amnesty program, which is part of cadet wellness, is a quick way to get them into a program and to get them help. And we'd prefer to do that. We understand what we've read, what little we've read about this, what little we know about it, we're not going to be able to arrest our way out of this problem. We are not going to be able to arrest our way out of this problem. So if we can get them to recovery, if we can get a medical amnesty program, get them to buy into that, I think that's more advantageous. And that's the approach we take. And I think other people are trying to do that as well. But that's what we do, and we'll continue to do that. Until we find something that's more effective, that's the way we're going to approach it.
Sure. Well, that makes sense. Thank you, Colonel. Something that popped into something that I recall was one of my partners who handles criminal defense cases. He was talking about Vivitrol versus Suboxone. I wanted to see, Steve, if you know anything about the differences between the two, if there's a better success rate between one or the other, if they're used at different times. Can you give us some info on that?
Yeah, sure. So Vivitrol is actually, all it is an opiate blocker. It's most recently, I think they're putting it as a pellet in your leg that can go like 3 to 6 months. From what I understand, they've, like, doing trials, they had heroin users, like, use bundles of heroin and still not get high from it. So that is just a pure blocker. So it's a route. I've never done it. I don't know anybody personally that's done it, but from what I understand, it's pretty effective at blocking the use. Suboxone is an opiate antagonist. So for you, as somebody who's never used an opiate, if you were to take it, you might feel something. But for me, when I was withdrawing, what it did for me is made me not feel sick anymore, but also took away the cravings. So that's what I was talking about earlier in terms of it gave me the time to get my mind straight without having to deal with the overwhelming cravings, which is the hardest part when you're withdrawing. That strong desire to use is what really gets people to relapse. So the Suboxone gives you that time, again, but only as a tool in your tool belt to get your mind straight, get your life together, get on the right path, and then it is an opiate, so if it is taken for a long time, you have to taper off of it so you're not facing withdrawals from that. But under the right doctor and as a tool in your tool belt, it can be pretty effective. But there's other options out there like Subutex. They're all just different variations of it's called Buprenorphine, and they include. So when you're on Suboxone, you can't use heroin. You won't get high. It also has a blocker built into it. So Subutex is, and they also have Naloxone in them, which is so you can't abuse these Suboxone. So there's a lot of different ones out there, but now there's generic, so it's a lot more not as expensive as it was before. But you said something else that I was going to bring up, but I believe there's pellets. There's these injectable pellets for Suboxone as well. And then, yes, Vivitrol is not an opiate, it's just a blocker.
Okay. All right. And you said you did use the Suboxone?
Yeah.
And you found it effective? You used it as part of your recovery?
Yeah, so it's said, and a lot of rehabs are using it, some are not, but they're giving it people on a short-term basis to get them through that. Again, if you're hard, I never used heroin, I was only on painkillers. I was too afraid to find the mix. Because again, you never know what you're getting. I was too afraid of needles, so I actually was very fortunate that I never got involved with heroin. I always had enough money to get pills. But when you're using $500 worth of prescription pills a day, the pain and the withdrawal of getting off of that is incredible. So the Suboxone really helped me get through that pain and the cravings and whatnot. So. And that's what the rehabs are using it for, to get people through those first few tough days. But yeah, so I use it as part of my tool belt. I don't recommend it for everybody, but unfortunately, I think a lot of people, it's gotten a bad name to some degree because you're giving it to drug addicts and they're misusing it, or they're just selling it to get their drug, which happens as well. But under the right doctor, under vigilant or good support system, and in a good program, it can be used very effectively.
I agree with Steve in that Suboxone can be effective. However, I would point out, as you already did, that Suboxone has been a problem for law enforcement throughout Delaware County. We've had problems with people smuggling Suboxone inside the prison. because it's the strips and it's easy
Yeah.
to conceal. We have people, as you point out, selling Suboxone, getting scripts and selling Suboxone. I'm not against Suboxone's use as long as it's used, as you have indicated, in a very limited basis in order to make the transition. Suboxone's like the new methadone, and so it has a purpose, but a limited purpose because we don't really want to substitute, I should say, one opioid for another. We want to try to wean the person off as you have, and so that's a great thing when you've achieved those results. But I know in law enforcement we're dealing with a lot of problems with Suboxone.
Thank you. Sergeant?
Just to follow, one of the first undercover purchases I ever made was of Suboxone. So the district attorney is absolutely correct. I cannot speak to the benefits of Suboxone. If it worked for Mr. Graham, that's fantastic. But it is a readily abused street drug. It does have street value, and we do see it out there being sold illegally and purchased illegally. So.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. With that, unless anyone else has anything they want to say, I was going to open it up to Q&A. The only thing I would ask is if you have a question, just come up to the mic up here, please. Unless we want to walk around the microphone, that's fine too, which is up there, Andy. And just make sure to talk into the mic, otherwise the recording will not pick up your question.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much. This is very informative. Two quick questions. I'm wondering if, from all of your experience with people who have come before the court or through treatment, are you seeing any general themes? I'm sure everyone has their own story, but there's probably some themes that have risen out of all of these cases you've seen, whether it's people who have become addicted through surgery or maybe it's a next drug after marijuana. So I was just curious if you've seen themes. And then my other question was, I'm fortunate to have grown children who also had Judge Osborne as their grandmother, talking to them from a very, very early age about the dangers of drugs. And there are a lot of young families here in Radnor Township, so I was wondering if there's any unique parenting tips regarding drugs. You know, we all know the show me your friends and I'll show you your future kind of parenting advice, but whether you think, especially those with grown children, there's any unique advice regarding drugs. For instance, my mother never uses street names of drugs. She won't say weed, she won't say pot, she says marijuana. Like, so I'm just curious if anyone has any advice. So thank you so very much, it's great.
Thank you, sir.
I guess in regard to the themes, what I see, two ways it typically happens. You point out that through football injuries or sporting injuries is one way a person gets addicted. Again, they're using the drug. It makes them feel good. It reduces the pain, and they continue to play sports for a longer period of time while they're under the influence of the opioid. So or it could be a car accident and they get addicted. And certainly some people have more of a propensity to addiction than other people. So that happens. The other way we do see it is what we're calling the gateway effect. And people don't say, well, geez, you know, it starts with alcohol and then marijuana and then some type of pills, typically goes into the opioid family, and then heroin. Now, I've gotten a number of letters from the prison where individuals, that's exactly what happened. It was alcohol, marijuana, opioids, heroin, and then they ended up in the system because they couldn't afford their addiction, and they turned to burglary or robbery and ended up in the state penitentiary. They're generally the two themes that we see. More and more, though, we're seeing it with the surgeries and the injuries, the situation where, and that's why when we talk to parents, and it's a personal decision for a parent, but if your child has their wisdom teeth taken out, do you really want to give them opioids, even though the dentist has given you a 30-day supply? And if you do give them opioids, maybe you should be giving them a couple pills for a couple days, and that would be it. You got to strictly monitor that. Very, very dangerous to continue to give them opioids. And a lot of times it is minor problems that physicians and dentists are prescribing these dangerous drugs.
Any other questions? Come on up, Jim.
Can I just comment on the money real fast? Just to put it in perspective, If you're buying prescription drugs, you can basically expect to spend $1 a milligram. So if you have a 30 milligram Oxycontin, which is a standard, one pill is going to cost you $30. So that's why Mr. Graham was gracious to tell us he was spending $500 a day. They get to the point where they just can't afford that anymore. Heroin is much cheaper and it's much more readily available. And an average bundle for heroin usually goes for about $100. And a bundle heroin can be anywhere from standard, statistically we say 10, it could be as low as 8. I've seen them as high as 15 or 16. But the interesting part is if you buy and you get 15 or 16 or 12 the first couple times, if they get to know you and come back, you can better believe you're only going to get 8, 7, because they know they have you.
Thanks, Sergeant. Jim?
Is this on?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay. I'm Jim Yiannopoulos. I'm licensed as a psychologist. I work as an educational consultant, and I mostly see high school students who are looking to go on to college. I've got a couple of comments and a couple of questions. The first question is really, for Steve, from the time you started to take something till that low point, how many years was it?
6.
Okay. Because one thing I'm hearing a lot about what happens when people get involved with law enforcement. As you pointed out, you were never involved with law enforcement. And my sense is that as much as we'd like to think it's not as prevalent in a town like Radnor Township, that, you know, people who don't have the money are more likely to come in contact with law enforcement. The people who do have the resources are less likely to. You know, so I wonder about that. Of all places, I was at my Harvard Business School reunion this weekend, and one of my classmates did a presentation. She's authored 2 books now. She had a daughter who was a student at Boston College. So imagine, she was a very good student in high school, you know, honors student, because Boston College is really tough to get into. She was a junior at Boston College, and daughter announces to her in the middle of junior year, Mom, I think I need to leave school. I need to get into treatment. I'm a heroin addict. And Mom nearly fell out of her seat, didn't know what to say. She hadn't noticed any signs, and literally the daughter had been doing things leading up to this for years. And to your point, you were successful, you were, you know, so we often think, oh, everybody's going into cars and stealing stuff to get money, or, you know, they're down and out, they can't get a job, and that may be true for a certain segment who doesn't have a lot of resources, but then we got other people like you and this girl I'm describing that can go on for years looking very productive and successful. So, you know, I just wanted to mention that, and actually, if I can find it here, the mom, after the daughter came home, she went into treatment for a month, came out of treatment, and then died of an overdose, by the way. The mom's written 2 books. The first one was called Heroin's Puppet, to your point that it's not your kid anymore, it's somebody else. And then that didn't have that much acclaim. I don't know how much usefulness there is for us, but she wrote it for herself, kind of. But the second one was she found her daughter's journals and decided to publish those. So I just thought you might want to know about that. It's actually called the Rehab Journals of Amelia F.W. Caruso, 1989 to 2009, when she died. But there's a lot in there that gives a lot of insight to what an addict is going through, the struggles they're going through. You know, it's not like the whole time they're just oblivious to it, they're trying to fight it. So my second question, you know, I've heard a lot of good things here tonight, really, I appreciate it. Are there signs, and maybe we, you know, at some point we need to have treatment people come in here and talk about this too. Are there signs that family and friends can be looking for? Because not everybody's going to bump into law enforcement. Not everybody's going to break into a car to get money for this. What are some of the signs or signals that we could be looking for that a friend, a loved one, somebody we know is having a problem?
Yeah, from my perspective, and I meant to mention this earlier, so there's a few things that I would say. There's the drug side effects you can start seeing where people are touching their nose, they're always kind of hot, they're kind of sweaty, their eyes are small, where it's cocaine, your pupils will get big, your pupils will get small with opiates. But also just like if your son or daughter used to be very outgoing and now they're like always in the basement, they always want to watch TV, they never want to go out, that type of stuff. Always never have any money anymore. Or you're noticing 20s are missing, like that type of behavior, that's pretty standard. And I agree really with your point about this neighborhood is a lot of wealthy people, so they're not running into law enforcement. I know from AA and NA that there's plenty of people around here that have these addiction issues. And as much as I agree with all the programs these guys are working on, I also think it starts with the doctors. It's been overprescribed, starting from the pharmaceutical companies overselling it. But we have to start telling these doctors that kids that are getting wisdom teeth don't need 30 days supply. And that to me is what I think should be where we're kind of starting addressing this issue, because you guys, I would have never run into you, so you could have never helped me, you know what I mean? But if I had never been prescribed as much as I was in college for my appendectomy, for my wisdom teeth, and for surgery on my hand, I would have never had leftovers to have gotten hooked on them, in the first place. And the fact that they're prescribing OxyContin 80 milligram pills, which were for people that were dying, to people that are having minor back pain. Like that's the type of things that were going on, and I think it's been curbed to a degree. And they've actually made a lot of these pills anti-abuse proof, so the bigger ones are now like all gel up if you try and abuse them. But now kids just do the 30s that you were talking about, all the little blue things. But I think it really starts with education and then the doctors, which I think a lot of doctors are being more. But then you run into the issue where people with real pain complaining that they're not getting the pills they need. So it's a tough thing to deal with, but I think it really starts with overprescription and going after the pharmaceutical companies, but unfortunately they have been litigated against a lot already. But yeah, so in terms of like looking out for things, money issues, not hanging out with their friends anymore, and then the drug side effects. But my wife didn't know for years, and I was in front of her all day, every day. My mom didn't expect a thing until my dad told her. So it can be something that if you have the money and you can get drugs, you might not never know that they're on it. So,
For heroin, it would be, you would see the physical evidence of it. You would see possibly needles, although you can snort heroin. You would see the glassine bags, typically empty. You possibly would see a spoon. They usually have the, sometimes referred to as a tourniquet wrap or some type of rope that they're going to tie around their arm typically to get their veins bigger when they're using it through the needles. These are, and they get sloppy with it. You should be able to see it somewhere in their bedroom typically. They may throw it in a drawer. As a parent, my position is it's my house. You may think it's your bedroom. I don't care about your privacy. I'm going to go and look through your bedroom whenever I want to look through your bedroom. So I think we have to get more assertive and keep our eyes open as parents for these type of signs.
and to build on that, the track marks, the bruisings in the arms, and even in their feet, they'll hide it in their feet, their veins of their feet and their hands. So that type of stuff as well. But again, my experience with heroin is very limited, fortunately, but that's true.
So obviously wearing long sleeves in, unseasonably warm weather and things like that, right, would be kind of, kind of precursors of that. So any other questions? By all means, if anybody has anything else, come on up and you can grab the microphone right there. That's in front of the laptop there. There you go.
How you doing? Thank you, guys. I was wondering if anyone could speak to exactly how it hits the streets. Is it all coming from the pharmaceutical companies? Is it stolen, or is there illegal production or anything like that?
Are you talking about the opioids, the pills?
Yes, the opioids, the pills, yes.
Okay.
If you don't mind, yeah. Most of the heroin that comes into the United States comes from Central and South America. But the heroin in the United States is completely and totally bipolar. The heroin that's available on the West Coast is called black tar heroin, and the heroin available on the East Coast is white heroin or China white or whatever, which is a misnomer. I'm not familiar with the West Coast having the fentanyl problem of the East Coast. I can't speak to that. I can tell you for a fact that a heroin addict from the West Coast would not come to the East Coast and do heroin because he'd be like, I'm going to die. That stuff is too powerful. Heroin addicts from the East Coast will not go to the West Coast and do black tar heroin because it's a waste of their time. It won't do any good. Fentanyl is something that can be manufactured in a lab. That's why you're starting to see it on the news. I believe the city of Philadelphia just had a big bust of a fentanyl lab. Much in the whack in the day when methamphetamine and crystal meth and the bikers and all that stuff were doing all that stuff, we're starting to see the making of fentanyl on the street. The heroin that gets to the East Coast, by the time it gets to us, 99% of the times it's already been stepped on or broken up and packaged. To my knowledge and my experience, I've only seen uncut heroin one time. Now, I'm sure these guys can attest to seeing it more, but usually Ohio is usually the cutoff point. By the time it gets through Ohio, it's been stepped on, it's been cut, it's been packaged, and then it comes east to Philly, New York, stuff like that. But to answer your question, most of the heroin in the United States comes from Central South America. The fentanyl-based product can be made. Now, whether it's made overseas and shipped over, or it's made right here, but it is a product that they are rapidly learning how to make, and they tweak it and they can adapt it, and that's why you have the difference between fentanyl and the cofentanyl, like the district attorney was explaining the different levels of it and different how strong it is and stuff like that. So I hope that answers your question.
And in terms of the pharmaceuticals, obviously that starts with the pharmaceutical companies, which we're addressing, right, which make its way through the doctors and then obviously on the streets. So
We've had a number of cases where they've stolen from a pharmacy, or we've had individuals that came in for either to do electrical work or carpentry work in a doctor's office, or even in like a CVS pharmacy, and them trying to steal opioids. But generally, most people are getting the opioids from their doctors, and there are these pill mills out there that doctors are giving them without complying with the medical standards. And we have investigated through the district attorney's office a number of these doctors, and we've prosecuted just in recent years 3 major doctors. The last doctor out of media received a 10 to 20 year sentence for unlawfully giving prescriptions and actually making people addicted to these drugs. And we continue to investigate doctors. Now, doctors are generally good and they're few and far between, but these doctors we knew were bad, and we were able to prosecute them, and the last one, again, receiving a very severe sentence.
In my experience, I actually never went to doctors to get them other than when I first got them from my surgeries. The dealers I was getting them from were actually using elderly women and men. They were getting them to go to doctors and then buying the prescriptions from them then to sell to us. So then that older woman would get the money she needs for whatever. She didn't really need the drug. She would go to multiple doctors, and then that's how he would get a lot of them. So I'm sure there's multiple different ways, but I never went to a doctor to get them, although I'd had friends that did that, but I just thought there was more risk of me there's more paper trail of that and more risk of getting caught. So, but that's how my experience, my dealer was getting it.
thanks, Steve. Any other questions?
Again, thanks for having this. This is, oops, sorry. I came over from Broomall, so we heard about the Radnor doing this, and it's great. I think it has to be more things have to be like in other towns and school districts. I think this is great.
Well, thank you.
But I have 2 questions. Number 1, when does this conversation start with your children? I think you said the youngest was 18 years old, the oldest case was 65 years old. When does the conversation start with your children? Is it middle school, is it freshman in high school? And 2, how do we promote this education in high schools? I'm 7, 8 years removed from high school. I don't remember any of this being in our health books. I don't remember health teachers ever promoting or talking about this. So they're my 2 questions.
Steve made mention of the DARE program, and I agree with Steve that the DARE program's outdated. But what I made reference to in my comments is NOPE, Narcotics Overdose Prevention Education. It's a group that comes in from Florida. When we first saw this as a problem, I partnered with council, and I was actually, with different members of my staff, going to some of the different schools and putting on a program about opioids, the problems with opioids, the addiction capabilities of opioids, as well as leading to heroin. But we were getting spread so thin that all of a sudden we found out about NOPE. And so I partnered with NOPE. I went to the intermediate unit at the Delaware County Intermediate Unit with all the superintendents, and I asked them if they would incorporate NOPE. Now, I believe that we should be starting, the DARE program started in 5th and 6th grade. I believe we should be back to 5th and 6th grade. However, you know, at a minimum, if you don't like that, then 8th grade at a minimum, but definitely it's got to start in the middle school. And they got to have programs in the middle school, and they have to have programs in the high schools, or we're being ineffective because they're exposed to it earlier than you think. We as parents, and myself included, tend to be naive as to how early our children are exposed to some of these issues. So, and I know Councilman White's also been an advocate of starting at a young age and the different programs.
Yes, and District Attorney Whalen did make mention that we will be meeting with the DCIU to try to push some kind of program in the school districts that they do start at an early age. During the NOPE presentation, there was actually a group, 2 boys had a sleepover. I believe they were 12 and 13 years old, and both of them OD'd during that sleepover. So that's what we're fighting now. So I think, in my opinion, I think junior high school is too late. So 4th, 5th, 6th grade is when you start educating them and letting them know exactly what is happening. And District Attorney Whalen, County Council, as I stated, will be meeting with the DCIU, and if need be, we'll get legislation passed, or try to get legislation passed. I know there are a couple state representatives that are very interested in it, and having this done across the whole Commonwealth.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's eye-opening to think. My son's 6, he's in 1st grade, so it's just, it's kind of surreal to think that in 3 years, 4 years, and I agree, I think you're right, that he would be learning about the dangers of this. And I think, I mean, what I saw, and this was earlier this year when they made that bust, the carfentanil bust, but I didn't know that it's a minuscule amount of this carfentanil that will kill you, minuscule. So, I mean, that was something visually for me that had a large impact on me, and I'm 34 years old. So.
And just so, carfentanil doesn't have to be ingested or snorted or anything else. It can be absorbed. So it's not just touch to the skin. It's not, when we say minimal amount, and I assume that's what the sergeant meant, he just did this. It may have been just absorbed right through his pores that the officer became a overdose victim. So that's how powerful carfentanil is.
He's absolutely correct. The first half of that story was they had a car and they knew there was drugs in it and they knew it could be fentanyl, and they were actually in biohazard suits with rebreathers, searching the car, dotting their I's, crossing T's, getting all their stuff together, and they were back at the station, and he just, out of habit, you know, everyone wants to look their best, and somehow he got on it and it was absorbed to his fingertips. But that's absolutely correct. Just real quick, opioids is the plague. This is what's killing people. But I think it's important to address, especially with our younger kids, all drugs. Because, yeah, heroin's out there. And like the councilman said, it doesn't know an age group. But it goes to a state of mind. That the idea that smoking a joint's no big deal anymore. The idea of drinking before you're 21, it's no big deal anymore. And I personally, I can't speak for these people, I believe that's just as big of a cause of people moving on to more drugs as the doctors who are definitely overprescribing and all the other things we talked about. It's a way of thinking that I think we need to start with our smaller kids, and hopefully when they get to the age where they start seeing the harder drugs, they're more prepared to deal with it. But that's just my opinion.
I concur. I absolutely concur. I mean, we get this question on marijuana all the time, and we haven't talked about it a lot tonight, but it would be a critical mistake to legalize marijuana in the state of Pennsylvania. I think it would be detrimental to our children. It would be detrimental to our society, and I think it would be a huge mistake. And I've never been for it. I've publicly spoken against it. I know some of our state legislators have spoken against it. I know there's one senator that's in favor of it, but I'm definitely against it. And it's because what I see every day on the street and what I see the kids ingesting. And the minute we as parents find it acceptable for a teenager to start drinking, then they're going to find it acceptable to go on to the next drug and the next drug and the next drug. We got to be vigilant as parents, and we got to make sure that we're telling our kids to follow the law. And there's a reason why you're not supposed to be 21 until you drink. And the American Pediatric Association has come out and said anyone, even in medical marijuana where it's justified, if you're 25 or under, not to use it because of the effects that medical marijuana or marijuana has on the brain. So it's a big problem, and we as parents have to really realize that this could be a very dangerous proposition for our children.
Going back to the earlier point about, I'm very afraid about my son. He's 15 months old now, but just my wife and I always talk about how we're going to treat it. But for me, it's just going to be open communication and telling my story to him. My dad was, as I said, an alcoholic, but I never heard the horror stories of his alcoholism. He was sober before I was born, but I think that might have helped. It was kind of more of like a secretive thing, but I plan to talk to my son and be very open about it. I think communication is one of the biggest things. And to their point, fentanyl is actually prescribed as a patch, so you actually put it on your body, so that's why it's very high bioavailability in terms of how fast your body can absorb it, so that's why it is like that. But.
Thank you. All right. Sure.
I have heard that heroin is very addictive and almost impossible to get free of. And I just wonder if you have any statistics about the success rate of people who fall into that trap and try to get out.
Very, very few, unfortunately. I don't know the exact statistics. You guys might know it, but
I've been told different statistics, but it's very low as indicated. I've been at one time told 9%, 12%, very low. It's an overwhelming drug. It affects the brain. It reconditions the brain. In order to be successful in recovery, we got to bring that brain back. We got to recondition the brain to start thinking differently, to reacting differently as an individual is drug-free. It's a long process. It came up earlier. Steve had mentioned 90 days or so. What we're seeing is typically a year, but 6 months in, 6 months out. That type of rehabilitation, the 30-day programs we're concurring, do not work. The problem is with insurance, too, may not cover it, commercial insurance. Sometimes people get a better situation when they're paid for by the county through the federal and state dollars that are available. They get an evaluation, and that evaluation may recommend 90 days, 120 days, or 6 months, and we need to follow up. We made reference earlier today, too, to recovery houses. There's pending legislation to regulate recovery houses because we're a little concerned that some of them are just flop houses. But we know in Delaware County, we mentioned MVP Recovery. We know that they do a nice job. They monitor everyone in there. They make sure they're not using. They make sure they have jobs. They make sure they're reporting. All of that is important in a good recovery house. But it's a long process in the road to recovery, and we only hope that people forge and on to achieve that, because what happens is they relapse, and unfortunately it may be fatal.
Thank you. Yeah, and MVP Recovery, if you haven't heard of them, they're really becoming the premier recovery system as far as I can tell, at least here in Delaware County. And I've been to a couple of their awards ceremonies, and they're very encouraging. They really work with these individuals that need it. So that's been a welcome addition to the arsenal here that we're trying to work with. So are there any other questions? We're about 2 hours out from where we started, and so I appreciate everybody for coming out. That's always appreciated, and I want to thank our panel. Obviously, these gentlemen know what they're talking about. I learned a lot here. I hope everybody did too, but that was great. So. So I just want to thank District Attorney Jack Whalen, Councilman Dave White, all right, Sergeant Joe Pinto, Steve Graham, Colonel Church, thank you all, and thank you everyone for coming out. Thank you.